Open, what? Oh, you said we were good. Do I get a countdown like a 4? Oh. Oh, you should. Well, can we ask, well, let's just do that when we do the, okay. Now we're good? Okay. I'd like to open the City Council special meeting on June 23rd, 2022 at 1500. Call to order, roll call.
Here.
Here.
Present.
Here.
All right, we can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll do the consent agenda. The consent agenda items are considered to be routine and are acted upon with one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless the mayor or council member of city staff, or a citizen requests an item to be removed from the consent agenda for discussion. Items removed for the consent agenda will be placed on the regular agenda in a sequence determined by the city council. Any item on the consent agenda which contains written conditions of approval for the city of Eagle staff, planning and zoning commission, or design review board shall be adopted as part of the city council's consent agenda approval motions unless specified or specifically stated otherwise. Does anybody have a motion and or discussion?
Mr. Substitute Mayor.
Mr. Substitute Mayor. Oh,
Mr. However you'd like to.
am I just chair or what am I?
Council
President? Council President?
Mr. Council President,
Yes.
I would like to make a motion to approve item 4, all consent agenda items A and B.
Okay, motion made by Gindelsberger. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Russell. Do I, any discussion?
Nope.
No discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Motion carries. Okay, work session, comprehensive plan review committee final recommendations. I shall hand it over to Nicole.
Good afternoon, Councilman President, Council. Nicole Baird Spencer for the record. So today I'm here to present to you the Comprehensive Plan Review Committee's recommendation for updating the 2017 Eagles Home Plan. So just to kind of give you some background of what we've gone through this process, and I will defer to Councilwoman Gindelsberger and Councilman Bond. They both attended several of the sessions, and so they can kind of give you some insight if you're looking for it as to how the sessions went and kind of the general tenor and communication that came out of it. So what was the committee's role? Their role was to review the 2007 Eagles Home Plan and recommend areas for updates and amendments to the City Council by today, oddly enough. This review was a review of the existing plan, and I want to emphasize it was a review. It was not meant to be a line-by-line edit of the document. It was a review. What portions of the plan were outdated, and there are other themes or priorities that were inconsistent with what the committee felt the vision for Eagle was. And then are there ideas or themes that they wanted the city to consider? So with that, we kind of went through what was a recommendation and what wasn't. The recommendation provides direction for a planning process or research that needs to be considered. It's not a strict standard ultimatum or a strict directive. The council will create the scope of work that will guide the drafting of the plan, the public participation, and additional community discussions. From what the committee recommends, recommendation included, the council will decide what of the committee's recommendations is included in the scope of work. That is all at your discretion. So this is advisory to you. This is not a required process. So I just want to be clear as we move forward. This process is a process that was established by the city. We've done it now the last 3 times we've amended the comprehensive plan, in which we kind of go out and just have a broad spectrum of the community come together and help us understand just kind of what they're feeling, what they're seeing, and what they think that we need to be focusing on. So if you think about it, you guys started this process with your commandment, like, let's amend the plan. And from there, we started this process. We established the Comprehensive Plan Review Committee, and now we're transitioning into this project development process. As we go through this process, it's important to note that we'll have increasing public participation through the process. So while the review committee didn't take public testimony and it wasn't open to the general public to come have the dialogue, that wasn't the intent of that committee. this committee's intent was to help actually just give us some more perspective, a little bit more robust view of what needed to be considered. The final recommendation that you received in your packet and was addressed in your memo, there's two parts. There's themes and processes. These are the results of commonalities from document number 2, and facilitated questions and discussions with staff, and that was attachment A. Attachment B was the notes, the annotated notes, when that committee went through every chapter of our comprehensive plan. We allowed them to keep notes. We combined them into themes, so when we were hearing what was happening or what concerns were, those are there and documented for them. That is not what we're going to talk about today. And the reason is that's a good document for us to hand to a consultant or for our staff to reference as we go through the process. It's just a little too much detail, too fine of a grain for where we're at right now. So the broad themes, I'm going to focus on just the broad themes and processes as we go forward. So the broad themes we heard was that the overall structure of the plan is sufficient. There was a lot of redundancies of the policies and goals. They felt really the document was maybe a little heavy because things were just repeated over and over. Overall, the plan needs all the background data and corresponding charts updated. We need to be careful as we draft the next plan. The committee felt that it was really important that we be careful what we're putting in the plan, that it's not creating it's not automatically outdating itself. And so that was one of the considerations that as we move forward. The plan needs to address the growth in Boise and Gem counties. The current document really only addresses growth from the Compass planning area, the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho, which doesn't address Boise and Gem County. And it really needs to focus on what the population of the city is going to be in 50 years. Sometimes we plan for a shorter time period, sometimes just 20 years, but they really felt it was really important that we be constantly out and a little bit more forward thinking, especially with some large entitlements that exist in the city today. The plan needs to address the current utilities and facilities plan, fiber, cellular, schools, water, all of that there's been some changes in who our utility providers are. We're now working on a fiber utility as a community, and that really we needed to be a little bit more better about making sure everyone was getting included. While saying that, they also felt that there was a need to limit some of the policies that the city's putting into the plan, because if we don't have jurisdictional authority, putting it in our plan, something that we can't implement, didn't make a lot of sense. And so really cross-referencing our plan to specific planning documents to an outside agency. So we're not constantly having, as they're updating their plan, we're not having constantly follow up with updating our plan. The plan should better address the integration of parks, trails, and open space, creating a complete picture of the system citywide. There was a concern that the current document, I'll admit it, in the current document you have the foothills and you have the river plain, and neither of the two shall meet. It's just like an imaginary line in our plan, and you have the foothills and you have the rest of the city. And they really felt that when we're talking about parks, trails, and open space, it should be a seamless network throughout the entire city. We should have policies that address how parks, maybe in the floodplain, augment some more habitat areas in the foothills, but that it's all one network for our citizenry. They also felt that we need to expand the vision of parks, trails, and open space to include things like sledding hills or a YMCA or swimming pools or habitat preserves, agricultural land, and scenic resources. So they really felt that it needed to be a broader discussion of those elements within the city. The committee felt that we needed a better and more accurate picture of what roadways would look like in Eagle in the next 50 years. They recognize that we need to work with ACHD, ITD, and VRT and Compass, that these aren't necessarily things we have control over, but we really need those agencies to come in and help us be part of the process of establishing what it looks like, because it does have such a huge demand on how our city functions with the 4 highways within us. Establish a plan that's implementable. So the 2017 plan was the first time the city implemented and had an implementation section, and which actually had specific tasks and goals and projects to get done. And they felt it was a little too robust, that we need to focus on 1 to 5 years of activities that can actually be implemented. The council should use the plan to guide other decisions aside from land use. So your comp plan spends a lot of time talking about all the other things. Land use is only one chapter of your plan, and that we really start using the plan to better guide a lot of the decisions we make within the community. And finally, that it guide the daily management of the city, the budget process and developments, like working through establishing departmental work programs. So a department may have 4 tasks within the comprehensive plan, having them come back to you annually. How are they going to implement those tasks? So that first section came out of kind of a summary of what we heard through the conversations. But when we got to the end, there was really still some discussion to be had. And so our last meeting was a series of directed questions and responses in which we actually asked some very pointed questions as staff. They worked in table groups to come to summary and then shared out with the whole group. And then we kind of tried to find, was there consensus amongst the groups of what we were hearing? And I will tell you, there was not perfect consensus, but we can give you the direction they provided us. So the first question we asked was, should the plan be rewritten? That was the whole point of the committee was, should we be doing this? And they said, yes, it's time to rewrite the plan. It's definitely time to take the effort. They felt some pieces could be streamlined and done really quickly, but other sections would require a little bit more time, effort, and lift to get done. The plan should be streamlined and well edited. That was something we heard throughout the process, that they felt that kind of maybe the last plan was a good start, but it probably needed a lot more polish than we gave it time for. And that really reflects in some of the accuracy of the plan. There we go. The committee did not come to a consensus about what chapters were best outsourced to a consultant. We did ask them that. But they did say that land use, parks, trails, and open space and transportation were the 3 most important chapters. And that was a very high consensus in that discussion. We asked what plans, studies, or coordination needed to be done before the city begins the rewrite process. Through this process, we heard from the sewer district. They're rewriting their master plan. We heard from the school district. They're rewriting their master plan. So we really kind of wanted to understand how much we needed to wait or what timing did we need to take to make sure we were sequencing our plan into the right planning process. The committee came back that they felt that we needed to complete the downtown committee work that the city is undertaking right now, that it was an important part of what we do when we move forward. We needed to complete the Parks, Trail, and Open Space Master Plan that has begun scoping but hasn't necessarily gotten forward. And then finally, we needed to update the impact fee study. They felt that was a really important part of what happens with our comprehensive plan dealing with development. Should the plan continue to use sub-areas for the organization of policies? Now, this may not be as popular with some of you as others. They did. The committee actually said they liked the use of sub-areas and recommend that we continue to be used. They said this could occur through some new sub-areas, but also could occur through reducing or merging some of the existing sub-areas. This kind of came out as a conversation as like what happens when redevelopment happens or infill is happening, and there was a feeling that there just wasn't enough policies in there. The committee did feel that one of the areas, this was one of the largest areas for redundancies in the plan. So you would have a planning area, and each planning area would have the same 5 policies. And they felt that that was where the city needed to go in and take those policies out and make them general land use strategies, and then let the sub-areas really speak to the uniquenesses of the areas and the concerns or uses we wanted to try and guard in that area. Should the city continue to focus density into downtown Eagle and along major corridors to reduce the density in larger residential-only areas? Overall, yes. The committee agreed that this was a good policy direction for the city. The committee also agreed that there needed to be a larger conversation about land use densities in the city. That many of them felt that they were concerned about using density as a measure, and they would really prefer using lot size because people don't necessarily represent density can be represented in many ways. And their concern was lot sizing, that there's more of a homogeneous set of housing standards within any specific area. So that was their recommendation there. Should the city retain the rural planning area? Should it expand? Should agricultural industries be allowed in the area? Should the city address policies to protect active agricultural outside of the rural planning area? There's a lot there, I know. So first was, yes, retain the rural planning area in the city. Generally, the group agrees that the area is about right and it's an about right location. So that work we did in 2017 about what was rural really was represented in that conversation. Agricultural industries were tricky. Many felt that small-scale industries such as U-Pick, produce, writing arenas, vineyards, and wineries were appropriate. But they did have concern about any type of large-scale ag industry manufacturing that could happen in that rural tier. And they wanted to be very careful that you weren't creating a situation where you went from a small winery to a large crushing facility. They felt there was a very big difference between the two. The truck traffic that was coming in and going out for those type of industries. And they felt that we needed to safeguard that rural area to be more quiet and agrarian. The city should establish a review process for prime agricultural land and establish policies for preservation versus development. They did feel that there were some places still within the city that we should really be looking at and say, this is really important agricultural land that can't be brought back. And the city should be looking at how we're going to deal with policies to either guide the preservation of them or establish alternative development standards for them. Should the city continue to work towards fiscal sustainability? Yes, the city needs to continue to work on the capital plan and specifically capital maintenance. There was a lot of concern about what we're doing, what we're building, and what it costs to maintain it over time, and the city's capacity to continue to sustain that day-to-day maintenance and operation. The city should also look at different land use impacts for the demand of services and the income received by the city. So when we're talking about land use, rather than it being just a land use we're desiring, what is the tax benefit and burden from those specific land uses when we start talking about the land use map? And the overall sentiment was, and this should not shock anybody, is to ensure that development is paying for itself, really as much as possible, that we're making decisions on land use and growth that are not putting the city fiscally behind in the future. How often should the city amend the plan? They felt that the plan should be reviewed and, if needed, amended about every 5 years. With that, they want to make it very difficult to amend. They really feel like if we're amending the plan or looking at the plan every 5 years, people amending the plan should be probably few and far between, and they should really be demonstrating that there is benefit for the overall community, that we're not just doing it because one landowner wanted more density or one landowner didn't like the commercial uses on that property, or something was going from commercial to residential because it was more viable at this point in time. So they did feel like that was something that needed to be addressed. That brings you to kind of the broad scheme of what we heard. Now, there's a lot of details in that Appendix B. I'm not going to lie to you. And I think all of it will get integrated into the process. It's just, when does it get integrated into the process? So today, we are kind of looking for you to give us some direction. We know that this is a workshop, and so you can't give us action, but we want some direction on how you would like us to proceed to the next step, which would be project development, scope of work, and consultants and staff projects. So how do we begin creating something that can be moved forward as a project? So if you, as you're doing this or talking questions, are you ready for us to prepare a scope of work? How much of the plan do you want it is going to be edited? Completion in-house or consultants, we'd like to hear your guys' responses to that. Timeline for completion, how quickly do you want this plan amendment completed? Are you telling us tomorrow, because then we have to talk about those famous 2 words I've been sharing with you recently, project capacity. So what takes over, or where do we find the gap to create the time to do this? And then the role of public participation. Do you want to have a comprehensive plan review, a comprehensive plan rewrite committee? How do you want to handle public involvement? Or are there other public planning processes you want us to consider? And then finally, the budget. This year we did have $80,000 for the rewrite. We've gotten to June, right? And so we're 3/4 of the way through, close to that, or 2/3 of the way through. And we've not spent any of it, or very little of it. I think I bought some binders. So how do you want that to go? That number came about from our 2017 number, in which we actually spent about $60,000. We added about $20,000 to that amount. I don't know that number is an adequate number if you choose to do consulting. We know right now it's a very stiff market for consultants. And then finally, is this a carry forward item? Are we augmenting it as we go into the next stage? So with that, I will stand for any questions you have or any direction you want to provide. And I'm going to sit down just so I can write while you do this.
Okay, any questions for Nicole? Queen, go.
I've got Mr. Council President. I have a
Councilman
couple of notes that I took down because how well versed was, and maybe you guys can answer this, the council, how well versed was the committee when they were talking about impact fees and like some of those restricted ones that the school does not have impact fee capability or ITD. So when they're looking at the whole entire community, and they all have to be kind of paralleling each other with some agencies can collect funds and some don't. And of course, school and the highways are big ones. And so was the committee well versed on, you know, what agencies do get to collect funds and what don't, and where the two don't meet? I mean, so that's my first part of that first question.
Mr. President and Councilmember Pike, yeah, the committee included all of our agency representatives. So we had representatives from ACHD, ITD, we had representatives from the school district all here. So they all, at the point in which you talked about their sections of the plan, were able to get up and talk about what they do and don't do. As to impact fees, the conversation, we really did try to keep the committee focused on what the city is able to do. We can't dictate, obviously, what ITD, ACHD, or any of those other entities can do.
That's my point
So
right there.
impact fees were focused on those things we collect impact fees for. So that's parks, trails, parks, trails, what we do for the fire district, and what we do for ACHD.
Right. And that's my point. If this was the public, I don't think has full knowledge.
I'll tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
Councilman Pike. So on that one, I'll actually do before, when we hit each one of the meetings, before each one of the sections that we went over, Nicole actually went through a lot of that stuff with everybody. So by the time we were actually talking about impact fees, everybody is very aware of what we had impact fees. So no, I would say the committee was very well educated on it before we actually started talking about it. Nicole did a very good job of going over every single one of the sections before we started talking. So even if somebody didn't know it, they definitely knew it before we started talking.
Good. Okay, and my part two is the portion when these are all paralleling each other with the economic development portion. There has to be a fine line between the size of ag and development, right? I mean, like if you want to bring in commercial and agricultural things into the city for economic reasons, what actual properties are left within the city boundaries to accommodate those?
So,
Did they get that information given to them?
Council President and Councilman Pike, they didn't get that. And the reason, we talked about land use, we talked about land use map, we had Robin here to talk about economic development. The reason they didn't get to that is that's too fine of a grain for what this committee was asked to do. Remember, this was themes.
Well, I mean, they put it into your, they mentioned.
Correct, and
you
they
mentioned
want
this
us to
in the
look at
study.
that theme.
Yeah.
That would be a process or a research project that would come out of the next step
Yeah.
in the drafting of the plan. But they were not given, like, we only have X number of acres of commercial left. And that was done purposely because they could never have completed this process in 6 months if they took every one of those items and detailed out
No, I
analysis of
appreciate
each of
that.
them.
That's not, my intent's not to get into the weeds on that though, but as far as them, I'm looking at these are recommendations from that committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, making sure, and Charlie just alluded to that. So as long as they were, and I know they were, and I attended one of them, but that was the initial one, so it didn't really get into the meat and potatoes of it. But I was just concerned with what the next step, what we're gonna have to come up with this project development portion of it, I guess, to just get into that and explain to the citizens and the committee people, whoever's on it next, where we are with,
So you can take any of these recommendations, you can leave any of these recommendations, you can say those are great concepts, but we feel like that we need to go a different way with the plan. This was a guide for you. It was to say, aside from the 5 people sitting on the dais, what other ideas are there about how we amend our plan? And people who, I will say the committee read every page of the plan. That was part of the committee's requirement. So when they're reading the plan, they had questions, and those are kind of what you're seeing here is those, we need more clarification on this, or we have concerns that the plan may not express this clearly enough. So bear that in mind, that it doesn't necessarily mean the plan's wrong. It may mean that we have a lot of work to do. It may mean we have very little work to do. We just need to say it better.
Councilperson Ginsberger, do you got any relative to this, like any insight? The only thing I would probably say is the big thing is what we see is Appendix A, the Appendix B component. When you see a lot of those are all of them. They're not, they haven't gone through. So you'll notice like, whether or not to expand or contract the urban or the rural planning area. You have both of them in there. So these are all, I mean, this hasn't been edited. It's like, well, we like this one or not this one. This is all of the comments we're putting in there as a basis for moving forward with the process. So there's a lot of the stuff that's in Appendix B that, relative to economic development, all that stuff. It's not meant, it was just a comment, and that would be used in the next step.
And I think they kept it at the 30,000 foot.
Yes.
view. Yeah,
absolutely.
Everybody got down to the ground, so.
Our goal really was in Appendix B was to have you see the flavor of the conversations that were happening.
All right, that's all I have.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Council President,
Councilmember Russell?
I have a question for Nicole. Relative to staff's involvement in the rewrite, length of time for completion with no consultants would obviously be a much longer process, correct? And quite a burden, I would assume.
Council President Vaughn and Councilwoman Russell, yes, it would be.
Okay.
I am me.
Right, okay.
So.
Any other questions or relative to, I guess I'll go on this one. So relative to going down these, so in-house, at least in my opinion, I don't think there's really
No.
it has to be contracted out
I agree.
with staff input. I think one of the biggest ones is going to be identifying whether or not if we do we redo kind of the 2017, which was, it was contracted out, but it was done through a big committee and it took a long time. Do you do it that way, or basically we have a fairly good basis? Do you contract it out, have staff work in coordination with the contractor in-house to get at least a first draft? And that's the first thing that the public sees when we do the outreach and stuff like that. Do you do either one of those? Because sometimes from planning, me personally, I hate going to the public and say, here's a blank canvas, tell me what you want. Whereas it's much better is like, hey, here's 3 options. Tell me which one you want, why or why not, and then how can we change those? It gives a lot more guidance. So I don't know if we want to go into that much detail with this discussion or not. Timeline, I'm probably, this is depending on how we identify how that's going to be done. More than likely, we're probably in the 1-year time frame, just based on how this went and how long it took. And I'd say at least a year. Again, just in my own personal opinion. Role of the public participation, I think that's a big, at least from my perspective, discussion on that. How much upfront, when, definitely a lot of, once it's in there, a lot of public input, meetings relative to what's there. But I think if it's guided, that helps it better, because that gives them I absolutely do not like this. So discussion on, and then relative to budget, no, I think it's definitely going to be a carryover and augmented would be my recommendation, based on the fact that I think we tried to do the open space and parks plan, and I think we had 100,000 estimated for that and couldn't get anybody. So that would be my 2 cents. Any other?
I tend to agree with you, so I think that we need to outsource with consultants, and the time frame, I know we can't accomplish much over the holidays in winter either, so that, we want to make it an open process with public involvement, so that will extend the time frame.
Yeah, I pardon me. I also agree. I think the thing is, if we don't start putting some type of timeline on it, some type of price point, we've got nothing in which to strive towards. So I think at least having some kind of goal deadline, price point wise, with our budget and also for completion. But I don't necessarily think we need to do, obviously, like you said, a rewrite of everything. Just focusing on those main topics would be the best use of our time.
What would you think, in your opinion, relative to budget and timeline?
Well, if you're saying at 100,000, you were having a hard time with Parks and Pathways.
On that, Nicole, what's your
What's
input on
gas
that?
right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Nicole, what would be a logical time frame and budget that is realistic?
So, Councilman President and Councilwoman Gittelsberger, the last time we did the plan in 2017, it took us 18 months after completion of the Comprehensive Plan Review Committee. We in-housed all but 4 chapters. Those 4 chapters were then consultants. What we did is, in lieu of doing we did a few large kickoff events like the comp plan, and we're doing it. But we then did individual focused public participation. So we did one on economic development. We did one on transportation. And we basically, staff kind of administered the process and then coordinated the public participation with the consultants to kind of get consistency across what was happening. That was an 18-month process. I would say to do what you want to do, and my concern is the chapters of concern are the 3 largest chapters in your comp plan. They're probably the most detailed of your chapters. So I would say you probably are at an 12 to 18 month window. And the reason I say that is if we go to a consultant or multiple consultants, making sure the plan has a single voice. One of the challenges can be that if you have multiple consultants come in and do pieces and parts of the plan, which is kind of what you read today, that voice is not consistent across the plan. And I think one of the things we heard from the committee and we've heard from the public was a desire really to get rid of redundancies. So the transportation chapter the land use chapter doesn't have to say what the transportation chapter says. It just needs to tell you it's there. But you need to have that staff coordination to do that. And I think that's going to be where we're going to probably have our biggest resource challenge.
Relative to that, so capacity, I'm going to come back to this one. So capacity, we already know staff member, and I think we've identified this over and over again relative to, there's only one of you. So I think actually in this one, relative to budget, we're talking a budget for contracting the plan itself, but what about discussion on budgeting for in-house support? So that would be augmenting the clerk's office or augmenting basically additional people in-house to help with that. This one, I guess, when I think 80,000, I think we're just talking the contract fee. We've got the budget coming up relative to in-house. Has that been submitted or discussed at all?
My budget is contained within the mayor's budget, and so I'm just a subset of him. So at this point in time, there has been a very preliminary conversation about bringing on an employee underneath me to help me with what I do. But that has not, I would really defer to the mayor in any of those conversations because he's the department supervisor.
Not here, so I gotta ask you.
Convenient.
Yes.
Follow up?
Yeah, so we can actually just follow up on that one. And the nice thing is we've got the budget session coming up. So as we go through these, that would be one thing just to bring up as part of the discussion. Any other, so I think relative to timeframes, anybody have an issue with the 12 to 18 month timeframe as a?
No, I think if we're going to do it, we need to do it right and spend the time and the money.
Nicole, can you go back one? I thought it was interesting because I remember a discussion of it, but relative to, the ability to make amendments in the future. I know that was a big one because quite honestly, there was 2 functions to that. One is, not changing because we have a single landowner. The other one is also not changing at the whim of, we've got a council in place and they don't necessarily agree with it. And if they can get enough, we can just change the comprehensive plan every 60 seconds. How would we do that? Yeah, how can we legally do that, or how do we make it so that's at least the process? How can we do that? Because quite honestly, council and mayor could do that whenever they want to.
So, Councilman Bond, I'm just going to go back.
Yes, no, please do.
under Idaho Code 6765, the comprehensive plan can be restricted in amendments to no stricter than once every 6 months. So we used to have a resolution in play in the city that said we would amend our comprehensive plan. I believe we did it in January and July of each year. And everybody, if you wanted to make a comp plan amendment, you came in and you had to make an application by a deadline and by a deadline. That was then removed. There's not really a good way to do this because you can't bind a future council, you just can't. They get to come in and take control. The comprehensive plan is written today in the implementation chapter, did set up some guidelines to be considered when a comp plan is amended. And so that's one of the places you do it, is you kind of build those questions, those guides as to what constitutes a rationale for an amendment, or what additional information they need to do. So if you remember, we did our fiscal impact tool is one of the things we put in place for that. We do require a transportation study when they want to come and change from residential to something more intensive. But it is a challenge. It really is a philosophy of the people sitting at the Diaz saying, no, we're going to hold tight to this plan because we find it to be an important document. Can't do much beyond that.
Well, yeah, this is one I want to know how we could do it. So the other one, quite honestly, with this one is citizens have to hold council appropriately. So if they do it on a whim, then theoretically the citizens get to control that through the voting process. Is there any other questions on this or any of the other things points that were identified in here that we want to discuss, or? Now you're off that. Now I got to go back to the last one. The last one was a good summary. Are there any of those other points, those last points that I guess we really, because quite honestly, it's, do we agree with the recommendation, yes or no, to redo it? Kind of sounds like, yeah, we agree with that recommendation. We've got a time, we identified kind of a general timeline. We identified whether or not in-house versus consultant. How much the plan is edited. I think we said basically it's we didn't really talk. Do we just want to redo those 3 primary chapters or redo the whole thing?
There are 4.
4 primary chapters? Let's see, transportation, oh, well. Open space parks.
What was the consensus of the
Yep.
committee?
Can we go back to the committee, the recommendations? Actually, hold on. Yeah, they didn't really have one.
Oh, sorry, Leah.
The committee did not come to a great consensus on this. Some felt we should amend very quickly, and some felt we should take our time. Some felt that some things should be done first, and some things should be done second. There we go. The highest concerns were land use, parks, trails, and open space, and transportation. When we asked, that was what we heard. Now, I will say, there were people who thought the economic development chapter needed to be rewritten. There were people who felt that the implementation chapter needed to be rewritten. So I would say that there was somewhere in the process, something in every chapter probably needed to be addressed. When we came down to this, these are the 3 chapters that seemed to be most concerning of the committee. Now, do we go out to a consultant and say, well, we want to use the plan we have, but we want you to reduce redundancies, we want you to do these things, and we also want you to focus on these themes. So don't start from 0. Start from where we have what we have, and let's do a very leaning of the plan, a more directing of the plan. That could be one of your options. Versus going to a consultant and saying, we need a new comprehensive plan. Please write all 12 chapters for us and make sure it has the same voice.
Mr. President, I'm just going to call you Mr. President.
Yes, Council Plank.
Yeah, with that said, though, I would think paralleling our staff with a consultant is kind of critical, that we don't just we don't dish out something to a consultant firm and just say, go for it. I'd like to look at the participation part, because we have the carnal knowledge and gone through it many times. to look at it and dissect it, but educate that person that is coming to assist Nicole, I guess, unless the mayor decides to bring on a staff member, but have somebody that can really, has the professionalism, but they really focus on the staff's recommendation and the committee's recommendation. They don't kind of wing it on their own. You know, they come in with us guiding them, I guess, is really important. I don't think to dish off something and say, because I think if I may just kind of elaborate on, was there a concern with the last comp plan with, it got, some of the illustrations were given to college students and they had an issue with, you know, the renderings of the 4 stories in the chapter. Wasn't there some issues that were brought up? You know, because they didn't
I
have
can
that.
address it. It wasn't in the last comp plan. So what happened is the city in 2011, when it drafted the downtown plan, did it in concert with the Urban Design Institute through the University of Idaho, Urban Design Center at the University of Idaho, and we brought students in to help do charrettes to design what that looked like. That's where those concepts came in, were integrated into the comprehensive plan. They existed in that plan well before the 2017 plan.
Right.
They were forwarded through the 2017 plan as part of the downtown chapter, but they weren't that. But I do think that that's a fair statement, and thus I think is part of the work being done. If you remember, one of the things that was recommended here was to complete the work of the downtown committee before jumping into that section, is to make sure that those more focused planning efforts are done and the works and outcomes of them is integrated into the plan.
I just think that there's a lot of validity to you, our carnal knowledge being setting the tempo for that. I wouldn't want to bring in somebody and reinvent the wheel by any stretch.
I agree, and I think, as Nicole mentioned, giving a consultant those 4 chapters and saying, you know, let's focus on making revisions that make Eagle what we want it to be, and then just tweak the other chapters maybe with staff help.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because with those ones, I mean, quite honestly, we've got, of the chapters, those 4 are the ones that need to be changes. The other ones, basically, you're looking for a one voice rewrite and limited redundancy. So it's almost basically going through and refining the existing chapter, limited with the majority of the work being done on those 4 chapters. So additional meetings. So would we have the contractors run the meetings or in-house run the meetings? I think historically we've been, quite honestly, when we did the last comp plan, the 17, is we had the contractor run the meeting and didn't go very well.
Well, that's what I was saying. If we take control of this and staff really directs it, this has to be from us. This is our comp plan. So I really think we have every ability and every right to really to guide it, direct it. And if you bring on a consultant, it's only based on the need for extra support, but nothing that would have them create something outside of the scope of what we want.
So basically, the concept of that one is basically bring on a contractor as almost a secondary entity to support staff in doing basically all the rudimentary tasks, putting the document together, all that, with city staff doing the majority of we'll call it the heavy lifting relative to changes to those 4 sections.
I really believe our staff is talented and skilled enough to be able to pull it off to the point where they have additional need, they bring in something, but I think it's our baby.
Yeah, as long as they have the time.
That's my concern.
Capacity issue.
Yeah.
Mr. President and Council, please take this with all due respect. You have a project capacity issue then.
Yep.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Even if we brought in a new staff member, that new staff member is not going to be consistent with the policy and the voice of the city. They're going to have time that they're going to have to learn that. You've got to start deciding then what and how you're going to redirect staff, because I'm still doing the capital plan. There's a lot of other things I do. I do all your transportation planning. I do all your capital planning. There is a point in which I don't know that I have the ability to give you the amount of staff time necessary to create a comprehensive plan in 18 months with using a consultant as a secondary to help supplement what we do.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you.
How about, okay, I'll kind of state mine. I guess mine would be two things. One, looking at internal budget for, if we talk bringing on a person, they wouldn't work on this at all. They would be basically the additional tasks that you have right now that you're doing, will kind of your more rudimentary tasks or somebody available that you can have task out to free up additional time for you. And then the second area is when we're talking about the comp plan, contractor would come in, do the comp plan. However, those 4 chapters relative to developing the, whatever's going to go out in coordination with the public, is you need to help develop that. So more along the lines of project manager with a consultant. So you're basically, they come to you, you're tasking them on everything. They're completing all the tasks, but you're kind of driving the boat.
And Mr. President, I think making the priority of where, I mean, that means something with the mayor has to help with that, guide the priorities, that where's the comp plan fit within all of that, so you do not get overwhelmed. No, I don't think it's fair to put any staff member past their capacity by any stretch, because even any amount of money doesn't even make up for the time part of it, and I don't want things falling through the cracks on any of the projects that get brought up. So being realistic to the need and where our priority is with this, I think it's just as important, because I don't want it to be where it's other things get missed just because it's so overwhelming. So I guess what do you guys think about the staff augmentation of the staff to help with the other, like Charlie said, with the other portions of responsibility?
I'd like to make a comment and ask a question. Is it possible to have Nicole put together a scope of how she can see it work out in the best goal of what we're trying to accomplish? She knows her workload and knows what, I really think we need her input on how to move forward in the best way. And so is it possible to ask her to put together something she can provide us that's more specific?
Well, we'd have to do, I guess, that would have to be, we'd have to make a recommendation or ask the mayor to do that. So we could do that. The other one, you actually brought up, Brady brought up a really good point relative to not just this. This is one project in about a half a dozen. So we have the comprehensive plan, we have the shooting range, we have the sports park, we have the open space and parks plans, we have that may be something else we need to do also, is we're kind of doing through. So we have the CIP process and the maintenance process, but we really haven't looked at is there's a bunch of that stuff that aren't on either one of those lists because they're plans. We probably need to sit down and hash out, basically put a list of all those together, because right now we are. I mean, staff is, we have a lot of stuff going on, and so that would be a good one to identify with staff and the mayor and stuff like that. Is like, hey, we have this list of 14 projects going on. We need to identify and prioritize.
Well, and it's kind of a cavalier statement to say, well, we'll just hire somebody to help Nicole.
Yes.
Right, yeah, and that's my
I'm sure she
concern.
could attest to saying that that's
Yeah.
not very logical.
That's
And
my
what's
concern,
the
yeah.
time frame of getting them up to speed just to
Right.
help her with her current day-to-day stuff?
Right.
May I make a recommendation? I think your recommendation is you want me to work with the mayor to come forward with a scoping process for the comp plan and how we ensure it gets done in a timely manner, including all my other duties and how that gets staffed.
I second that.
Is that where I'm at?
Maybe.
And I think you've given me a lot of information, because what you're saying is you do still want the plan to be guided by city staff. You want us to make sure that we're organizing public participation as that. We're not asking a consultant to do our public participation. You've basically said you'd like to see it in 12 to 18 months. I'm going to say 12 to 18 months from when we get a budget established, if that's fair at all. So I mean, you've given us a lot. You've given me a lot of things to work through, and it's given me at least a north arrow. Because if you would say, just go hire a consultant, that's a really different rewrite of the plan than what you've kind of given us directions. The one thing you haven't necessarily addressed is, do you want to use a comprehensive plan review committee, a comprehensive plan rewrite committee, or do you want to be doing that as yourselves? And now I say that we've done it both ways. The Eagle is Home plan was done with a comprehensive plan review committee. But when we did the Western Area Plan, when we expanded out from Linder to 16, that was done through a series of workshops that were done by the council. The council actually were the voice that was that public was allowed to come in and be part of it, and we still did public participation of the out product, but the council took that role.
You can't, Mr. President, you can't put an ad hoc committee together for this, this type of,
We can, that's
Yeah.
that's what I'm asking. It's been done both ways.
That's the advisory committee she's
yeah,
talking
so
about.
I mean, why not do it that? I mean,
And Charlie has experience being on the previous comp plan committee, correct?
Previous two.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could do,
Your,
because a lot of, from my perspective, so we're going back to we have the 2017, it went through that process. I'd almost, again, having the public can just comment, I'd almost say, we've got the plan, have the council do the initial swath, and then put that out to the public. So we're not giving the public this huge, you've got 14 different things to look at, in which case, we're gonna come up with 14 different, I think, that way we're all a little bit more calculated than what goes out, and what goes out, we can get input on it, and then make adjustments based on that.
Are you then comfortable with having a year and a half of Thursdays with Nicole? You have to commit the time.
Okay, let me
Your
gonna
existing
restate
council,
that.
your existing council meetings will not be sufficient for you to do that work.
right.
Because you're public hearings on Tuesday nights, it will not be sufficient. So it doesn't have to be Thursdays. We could do Mondays. I actually had a committee at one point in time Charlie sat on, in which we met at 6 o'clock in the morning. We opened up the building, we had coffee, and we sat for 2 hours before everybody went to work. But it will be, meaning that if the council is taking that role, finding and committing set time for that work to be done.
Mr. President, I want to be realistic about this in every statement I make, but because it's a workshop open setting, but, yeah, one, don't overload anybody. I'm reiterating that statement. But, having the opportunity to participate and having the people that the citizens that invested their time, being part of that too. We have to make up our mind, I guess we have to decide how important the comp plan is before we're, because we rotate through in giving, and I say that if whoever's elected is, we all know this, but you dump off a comp plan to maybe a new council or a new mayor. I'd like to be do our due diligence in a time frame that's realistic to us and staff. So I don't know how that. I don't have an answer for that though. Because I don't know what the amount of work it entails to really go. But I think we were focusing on those 4 chapters. At least that's a fair out of all those chapters. I mean, I'm just giving this as brainstorming, open conversation. Nothing's set in stone with this.
So to give you just some perspective, I was hired in 2000 and what year was our children born? 2004? Was our children born? That plan was written in 9 months. It was adopted the day after my daughter was born. Literally, but that was 100% of my time, and that was all council driven. They oversaw the rewrite. Staff did the work, but you oversaw it. They oversaw it. They directed how they wanted the plan written. They wanted the themes that they wanted in there, and when we took something to them they didn't like it, we worked with them to get a revision to it. I'm going to say this is going to take longer because that was just adding on to a plan that already existed, right? We were just adding an area. But I don't think it's outside the capacity of the council. And as cities get bigger, this gets harder, I will admit. When Eagle was 10,000 people, doing public participation was a lot easier because we only had 10,000 people. There was a very tight-knit community. You're now a community that's approaching 40,000. The ability for us to keep people engaged and bring them in and have the depth of community understanding they've had before, it's not always there. So having that ability for the elected officials to take a little bit more of a lead makes some sense because you were elected to be the guide to the community. You told them what your values were as how you wanted to run it. Now, yeah, councils change. I'm hoping not too much. It's nice to do these processes with a single council. But I do think it happens. It's not unheard of, but I think the process we use in Eagle is very unique because we've always had very, very intensive public involvement. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to have the public write the plan. It just means you need to make sure that plan is being vetted by your public intently before you adopt the plan. And so I think it can be done both ways. It's really at your comfort levels. And that's why I said it to you, like, how committed are you? Because if we're not using a committee, you're going to need to invest the time in the plan to make it the document you want it to be and what you want to send out to the public. You can use your committee, but committees can go sideways too, because they can go a completely different direction than the council's comfortable with. And then you end up with a plan that's not directive of what you would like to see of the community or what you feel is representative of what you want to put out to the community. So it can go both ways.
I guess the only thing, and just thinking about that, you brought up a good point, is theoretically if we have an 18-month window for this, there are theoretically could be 3 members that are not there halfway through this process. However, I'm still, again, from the commitment wise, what Nicole just said, I like, purely from the fact is we can guide it a little bit better. Again, it's front loading it, so when the community gets to look at it, it's not a giant, it's not so much. It's front loaded. We put the work in up front. We get it to something that's vetted through the citizens, and the citizens get to look at something that's much more organized. I think we're going to get better input from them. So that's my 2 cents. Any other discussion? Or?
Well, I agree with, I certainly can have the commitment to put in for this, so.
I think what I'll use is, I'm going to use my work direction is span of control is 3 to 5 things. People can do 3 to 5 things really well. And if you get past that, you kind of lose control of what's going on with your abilities and your skills. So keeping it in a narrow, broad band is cool. Having direction from council doing it, making a commitment. And Nicole, you're right. No one put a gun to our head and said, go run for office. And, you take on the responsibilities that come with that. The comp plan, I remember Charlie was talking about the comp plan was not codified in 2011 was the last time. Was that
2004?
or 4? So even further back then. So that's 4, 11, that's 17 we're dealing with. So we're 5 years into this.
Well, that's the difference. So when we take codified, so the city used the comprehensive. So 2017 is the current one relative to the county process.
Yeah, the county didn't codify, right?
And that's the city's fault. We haven't.
Yeah, okay.
We've submitted a couple times and it didn't really go through, and then we haven't submitted for a while. So, but yeah, it's never been. So this would be redoing the city's comprehensive plan, and then hopefully that we would submit that to the county. And actually, that's part 2 of this thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to just clarify that really quick. We can't control the county's timeline. The 18-month timeline I'm giving you is for us to have a new adopted resolution for a plan. And Tracy did chirp in my ear, and thank you, Tracy, because she helps keep me in line of, it's 18 months from the time we get the consultants on board.
Yes.
It's not, just to be clear, we can do a lot of scoping and those types of things, but if we're going to have consultant help, they have to be on page before we can actually be doing that work. But yeah, once we have an adopted plan, that's when we can make a letter to the county and say, please consider adopting this plan. We would like to negotiate with you. Then you guys get to go and have a conversation with 8 of you instead of the 5 of you about what applies in that process. And that's a whole nother, staffing issue.
So one other question, follow up with this one relative to this. One of the things that was identified too is relative to the parks, open space, and trails plan. Is we have the Parks and Trails master plan, which is basically going to be those sections that also has to be contracted out and done.
So yes, one of the things that we can talk about as we scope this project is, are there plans that exist or need to be done that create a cross-reference and become a chapter of the comprehensive plan? That was one of the things the committee did talk about in the redundancies is, why do we have a separate chapter that talks about parks, trails, and open space if you have a parks, trails, and open space plan? have that plan, just say this is the most recent document and let it go. Similar statement was made with economic development. We have an economic development master plan that you've adopted. Maybe there's some amendments to that plan that need to be done, but it can be folded into the comprehensive plan as a chapter and adopted by reference as like adopted by resolution, this plan includes these other documents. Word of caution. Comp plans are large, they're complex, they're used mainly for development applications at this point in time. You got a little word of cautionary advice from your committee on that. You will need to make sure that if you use other documents as cross-references to your plan, that you are continually going back to those documents to make your decision. It wouldn't just be, what does the comp plan say? It would be, what does the comp plan say? What does the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Plan say? What does the Economic Development Plan say? And you will have to be very diligent, and I say you, I mean all of us, the collective we, would need to be very diligent that when we're making our decisions as a community, we're consulting all of those documents, not just a chapter of any of those documents. Sorry, that's my lecture.
Any other?
I'm ready to take this on then. Let's go. Let's do this thing.
So Nicole, do you have enough from this discussion of kind of at least a route to go and have a discussion with the mayor as well?
I believe I have a route to go to have a conversation with the mayor, and I will probably bring it back to you once I've had that ability to have that conversation. I will say I'm gone next week. It's not going to happen instantaneously. I would like to just have the capacity to start working through this as we finish through the budget cycle, to kind of have an understanding of what we think we're going to be doing, making sure we have the budget behind it, and then being able in the new fiscal year to begin really with fervent effort to get this moving forward, if that makes you all comfortable.
The only one I'd like to include, and I'd like to get input from you guys, is we're just talking about the comp plan. However, I would still like to fold that in with the list of other projects we have going on. And I'm just saying this theoretically, does the comp plan, and I'm probably saying it probably won't, if we've got 10 things going on and staff says we can only do 4 and we identify the comp plan as number 5, does it drop off for a year? The only reason I want that discussion, I think that would be a really good follow-up discussion to have, is realistically, what projects do we have out there? What priority do we have for each one of those projects relative to staff recommendation on capacity? Because that's going to drive a couple other discussions like, hey, if our capacity is here and we want projects up here, we either have to drop projects down here or increase staff up to here. So
I will let you know that I am working, and I'm sorry, I am behind on your capital projects list, and the shooting sports park, the sports park, those projects are now back in your capital plan. Because they are starting to be expending dollars. Like originally we put the shooting sports park was an unplanned because we didn't have the opportunity, and then the opportunity presented itself. Those will be in your capital project list, and I'm happy to have you guys, when we go through that process, to talk about how you want to, maybe for meaning's sake, for prioritization, the comp plan, though it's not funded through the capital plan, is a conversation we have just about that project capacity and how important it is against those other opportunities that you want to get done during that time. I can add it as just kind of a space, like an extra, extra consideration category. So when you're doing that kind of, I know you're gonna all be excited, that paired comparison again. Woo woo. You can talk about just kind of how that falls into that overall goals. Does that work for you?
Yep.
Okay.
all right, any other discussion? Questions, concerns? Nicole, do you have everything you need?
Everything?
Do you have
I
mostly
have
everything you
enough
need?
to move forward. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Thank you.
So with that one, we'll shut that one down and move to executive session. This would be a question for legal staff. Is there actually a need for executive session, or was this just put on, do you have something to, we didn't know if this was actually put on there. It wasn't supposed to be put on there.
Mayor's not here.
Council President Bond, I really don't have anything to discuss.
All right.
I think this was supposed to be for Tuesdays.
That's what we
because
thought.
it's necessary to also have the mayor in it too.
All right, we just wanted to confirm that. So with that one, we'll bypass executive session, take that off, and move to action item 7, adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Gittelsberger. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Russell. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye, aye.
Aye.
Those against? Nay. We're adjourned.